to Theological Table Talk. This is the podcast of the Center for Christian Studies, and my name is Keith Stanglin, and we're happy to have you joining us today on the podcast. I have with me today Todd Hall, as usual, who is the Associate Director of the Center for Christian Studies. Todd, how's it going?
Good.
Good.
Thanks.
All right. And we're also joined today by a couple of other guests. First is Matthew Crawford. Matthew Crawford is Senior Fellow at the University of Virginia's Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture. He is a New York Times bestselling author. He writes on his Substack, Arcadelia, and has essays in a number of different journals. Among his books are Shop Class as Soulcraft, The World Beyond Your Head, and the book Why We Drive, Toward a Philosophy of the Open Road. So, Matt, glad to have you with us today.
Keith, yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Matt just finished speaking as our lecturer for the Center for Christian Studies First Things lectures that we put on every year here in Austin. And he has joined us today, literally around the table here. We also have with us today Matteo Moran, who is the Director of Advancement at First Things. He came for the lectures here in Austin and has been doing First Things related things and is here with us as well. So welcome, Matteo.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So what we want to do during this podcast episode is just chat about some things that Matt Crawford has written. I promise after the lectures that he has given over the last 2 days that we are not going to put him on the spot too much. What that means is that this is going to be a conversation where we can all hold forth as we like on these issues. But I do want to start with you, Matt. I'll keep calling you Matt instead of Matteo because we have another Matteo here. So Matt is Matt Crawford. Matteo is Matteo Moran. And I'm Keith Stanglin. No, I already said that.
I'm Matthew Hall.
Oh, you are, yeah. Todd, his first name is Matthew.
This is very confusing.
So we have three Matthews here. Yeah.
Clearly the more popular apostle.
That's exactly.
And then there's Keith. He was the 14th apostle.
That's right.
All right. So the first time I heard you, Matt Crawford, speak was probably 7 years ago, I think, at another event here in Austin. And you were talking about what you called at the time the male stigma. And I was just curious if you could maybe say a few things about that, or just maybe more generally, and we can all speak about this. What are problems that are facing young men, especially in our society today? That's a big question. But what comes up to your mind is just some of the challenges that are unique to young men.
Yeah, it is a big question. I mean, at the time, this is like 7 years ago, or eight, maybe even 8. I guess in calling it the male stigma, I was just trying to kind of name this fact that it seems like the male as a sort of category was under a cloud of suspicion, right? So, for example, on campus, there's a kind of whole apparatus, the point of which is to generate sexual paranoia, right? So the kind of the idea of that, there's a rapist under every rock and bush, and that somehow male sexuality is inherently illegitimate. So there's obviously a lot of reality behind such a worry, but it also seemed to be getting to the point that young men were coming up in an environment where some of their most, kind of basic constitutive, part of their embodied existence was under this kind of, again, cloud of political suspicion, and it seemed like kind of a malformation was happening, both for young men and women who were kind of schooled in this paranoia. And I wanted to kind of make a case for recovering um, joy and a kind of sense of playfulness between the sexes.
Mhm.
And yeah.
It makes it hard to ask a girl out on a date.
Yeah,
If
right.
you're one of the potential
Yeah.
dangers on
Yeah.
campus,
Yeah.
but by virtue of being a male.
Yeah. And I think, right. I mean, all the statistics say that, um, the dating scene is quite suppressed. Um, well, on the one hand, there's a sort of hookup culture, famously,
Yeah.
right? But apparently, when they do sort of more in-depth research, a lot of that turns out to be kind of mythical.
Mhm.
That in fact, they're having less sex than they were in
Right.
previous generations.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, to approach a woman and ask her out is a bigger risk than it once. I mean, it's always a scary thing,
It's always been a harrowing
right?
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but there's this kind of default reflex, I think, that any kind of overture in that way makes you creepy or a predator or something like that.
Mm.
And that's really sort of fatal to some really kind of basic vital inclinations that are important. I mean, male sexuality has to be domesticated, has to be tamed and turned to its proper ends. But it first has to kind of find expression.
It has to be
It has to be, yeah.
before it can be
Right.
properly limited and restrained. I remember, I don't remember the exact thing that was sort of outlawed, but I remember reading at that time that, and maybe it was at UT campus, but one of these campuses that it was frowned upon or seen uh, as going beyond proper limits just to ask a girl like for a phone number, or it was something that was just part of the beginning of a friendship, a relation, any sort of just acquaintance, and it was just frowned upon and seen. I think it was like if a guy's doing this to you and you don't want it, then that is sexual harassment.
Mhm.
Well, how do you know if the girl wants
Until you ask.
Yeah, before you say it,
Make it overture, yeah.
whatever the statement was. Anyway, it was just sort of like your hands are tied, lose-lose situation.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we've all, you know, when you're, young, like the first time you try to approach a girl, it's terrifying, right? I mean, I'm thinking of one summer camp where they had a dance at like the end of the summer camp. And of course, all the girls are lined up on one side of the room and all the boys on the other. And like, there's just this chasm. And to actually cross that room and approach one of them was, I think I did, if I remember correctly. And it was like, that was a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And I suspect that now, like, you have a reason to not rise to that challenge, which is, I'm too virtuous to do something bad like that. I'm going to be a good person. So it gives you like a pretext, I think, a kind of a pretext of kind of this political moralism for not rising to the occasion, which is a decisive and important sort of developmental step, like taking that risk, right, and getting shot down. That's usually happened to me.
Yeah.
And then, you bounce back and that's how you grow.
I think that 7 years ago too was kind of at the height
Yeah.
of some of this. I don't know if it has diminished since then, but Trump had just been, he was still early in his first term, and people were very upset about that. Then the Me Too movement and I want to say 17 or 18 is when that started picking up steam.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would, and I don't know if it's diminished since then, if things have gotten better for males in that regard that we're talking about, but just pretty
Yeah.
bad then, I think.
I remember at the time, just also just the thinking about how difficult it would be for a young man because of the hypersexualization of women at the time. Everywhere you look. I mean, if you think about like the award show for nobody ever watches, but like for the movies and things like that, and these women come out and wearing nothing, but
While they're saying,
do not
"Me
approach.
too."
Right?
Yeah.
Don't look at me. Don't objectivize me. Don't sexualize me. I'll take care of that myself. Yeah, and it just I thought at the time,
Mixed message.
I'm glad I'm married.
Yeah.
I don't have to navigate this particular world.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting dichotomy where I think especially, you're asking, I don't know if it's worse now. I think it's worse, but maybe in a different sense, which is the that attitude is seeped into a generation where, at the time when it was first coming on campuses and whatnot, people were still kind of troubleshooting it. So that's where you had all these stories of young men getting in trouble, the lawsuits that then occurred as a result of the Obama Title IX reforms.
Mm.
So you had this, in the 2010s, this odd milieu where the law said one thing, but these kangaroo courts that came up in the universities did another. And so there was a lot of this infighting going on at that level where you had people who were administrators who knew what one thing was. But then you had the Title IX thing, people, the coordinators that said, well, we had this dear colleague letter from the Department of Ed saying we're going to operate this way and we're going to enforce it. And I think now there's a dichotomy where it's seeped down to this younger generation who has not yet matriculated through the universities, who have, in a way, I think, rejected it, but they've ingested it to the point where they just don't bother anymore, right? They've now decided, well, I'm going to opt out of it entirely. I'm not going to even bother because even though I reject that paradigm, much easier not to engage with it than to try and revolutionize it or change it.
And I think the one thing that happened is that young men's, reading all these signals, if they felt it incumbent on them to sort of project an image of being innocuous, right? And I've wondered sometimes, the kind of speech patterns of and I'm not sure what cohort, to identify this with, but the kind of stereotypically gay sounding kind of up-talky way of talking, which now I think when you hear that, you can't assume that person is gay. I think heterosexual men are trying to kind of signal that I'm safe by doing that. Yeah, your whole self-presentation has to, you have to look with sort of self-suspicion and sort of modify that. And I'm just speculating.
Well, to be clear, because the gay guy is safe.
Yes, of course.
To the girls. Right. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
And now it seems like in certain milieus, more kind of, I don't know, upper middle class, maybe, it seems like dudes under 30, that's just how they talk. And you can no longer say, oh, well, that guy's gay. Nope, not necessarily.
Wow.
Have you noticed that? Or am I out on a limb here?
No, I think I've noticed that, but maybe I assumed that guy was gay.
Like if you're in a university,
because there is more of that than there used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, just if you look at some of the studies that have been promulgated, just looking at, whether it's, do you feel like you have to conform to certain political ideologies on campuses? Do you feel like you have to present certain ways? I mean, the data all points one direction, which is men, especially today, feel the need to present as more left-leaning progressive. However, when you look at all of the data about what they're truly, where they're actually, where they are politically, increasingly, diverging from women. Now, when I say that, the latest shows that it's women that have progressively moved to the left over the last few decades. It's
Yeah.
not men who have radically gone to the right.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how what used to be just pretty benign right of center male beliefs have now become coded as radically right leaning, even though they feel pressured to project more progressive in some cases.
And you have this kind of related phenomena, maybe it's complementary to that, where a lot of women, and now I'm thinking more sort of in their 30s age, are expressing real discontent with the type of male that they have summoned into existence with the demands that they be good feminists. And so apparently, it turns out a lot of women just aren't turned on by sort of soft, effeminate men. Rousseau has this great line. He says, if you want men to be virtuous, teach women what virtue is. Because, of course, men are just going to form themselves into whatever is pleasing to women, is the idea there. And I think women are a lot of them sort of realizing that this male type that they've been taught to prefer is not actually doing it for them romantically. And so you keep hearing these stories of like serious like radical feminists hooking up with like toxic right-wing male guys, and that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I was on I'm in New York, and I was at a panel with there were three female journalists who were talking about, what does, conservative culture in the modern era look like? And one of the things that the two of the more salient points that I thought were very interesting were, one, they were all in agreement that the sort of Sex and the City lifestyle that they have been sold for more or less their entire lives, and they're all under the age of 40, so fairly, young millennials, Zoomer types. And all of them to a T said that many women in that cohort today have realized that they were sold a bill of goods that is fundamentally incorrect and perverse in a number of ways. And on the other hand, they're trying to rediscover what it means to be virtuous in this current ecosystem. And they're finding that a lot of men are confused about what virtue is because they've been bombarded on multiple sides about, well, there's the virtue of, might makes right. There's the virtue of signaling certain political beliefs into a space. And so one of them, I think, made the second salient point, which is, we make fun of the quote unquote stereotypical Brooklyn man, but that's a recoverable demographic, because when you look at the way that they dress and comport themselves, it's not because that's just, it's just your quintessential progressive who wants to look and feel a certain way. No, they're really just trying to fit in. And I think there's a lot of, especially for young men, the desire to fit in somewhere and feel like a community of belonging, is where I think you can really recapture, and as this journalist made the point of saying, really recapture these men and maybe just channel those energies in a better direction than they currently have been for the last 15, 20 years. And hence why you see so many young men returning to church, I think, is they're finding a community there at least that directionally makes sense in orienting their energies in a virtuous manner.
Yeah. In church, like I read a book not too long ago. What was the title? I'm blanking, but in any case, it was making the argument that, well, first, just sociological data about who goes to church, and it's a lot more women than men. It's been that way for a long time. Except for the one real standout is the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Church, where it's actually more male, and you've seen a lot of conversions to Orthodoxy. I think it has something to do with that it's it's more friendly to kind of male energies, and of course, it's a very literally patriarchal religion. And also the priests are fathers, literally, right? They're not celibate. They're fathers, with the big beards.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like we're doing fatherhood here. And I'm not of the Orthodox denomination myself, but you think of God the Father, it's really fundamental, I think. And the father principle, I think, is very much under attack. And I've come to see a lot of different cultural phenomena through the lens of the concept of the father representing authority. And well, this is to digress a little bit, but
Go for it.
okay.
Yeah.
So in the history of political thought, the kind of origins of liberalism in Thomas Hobbes and such, I think consists of insisting that there's no important distinction to be made between a tyrant and a king. In other words, authority that is exercised for the good of those one rules, which is a fatherly type of authority, versus tyranny is rule for private gain. It's for the benefit of the tyrant. And I think we're living in the shadow of that political revolution, and it has now kind of anthropological and psychological fruit, namely kind of discrediting of the very idea of the father. I mean, just you're supposed to say parent now rather than father. I mean, so it manifests in certain verbal tics. I at one point got sort of into this idea from Freud that, so for him, the father represents reality. So you think of the infant and the mother bond. So the mother loves the child unconditionally, and it's this intense bond. And in the Freudian schema, the father is a kind of threat, right? Because the bond is not sort of naturally, obviously there from the beginning. And for Freud, the father represents sort of the external world that doesn't love you simply for being you. Rather, he represents this external world that has standards that you need to meet, and then you win the father's love. And so it's a crucial thing for development to have both the mother and the father. So in the process of maturing, you have to kind of separate from the mother and try to earn the respect of the father, and by extension, the whole sort of normative order that surrounds you. And so to undermine the father principle, you could say, is to leave us trapped in this sort of developmental stage that he calls infantile narcissism, where you just have to be affirmed, right? And that's kind of woke culture in a way.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. My truth, affirm me, and all that.
Yeah. So sort of back to something Matteo was saying as well, these women who are starting to realize maybe that some parts of the sexual revolution weren't so good. I think of Louise Perry and her book was Against the Sexual Revolution or something like that. And it sounds like maybe she's representative of a larger population that's coming to question some of those things, and also feminism's role in feminizing men in a way that they don't actually like and have come to discover that that's not what they wanted.
Yeah, there's more of, and I think it's a good thing that it's happening, precisely because it was, a fait accompli now for the last 50 odd years that everything that came out of the sexual revolution was an unalloyed good. There were no trade-offs that were seen as negatives. Um, and, I don't think anybody here is arguing for a return to some sort of regressive, paradigm shift in society. But I think it's good that we're on both sides grappling with the idea that, okay, maybe just, putting yourself out there and letting a whole bunch of experiences come and happen to you and not choosing to participate it's a real decision you should contemplate. It's not something you should just accept as an unalloyed good, which is what they've been sold for a long time.
Yeah. So my wife, Marilyn Simon, writes about sex and gender and stuff, and she's a Shakespeare scholar, and she's sort of developing a kind of this idea that submission for a woman is actually this enlivening, uplifting, beautiful thing. So she has a reading of The Taming of the Shrew. So the standard feminist reading of this is that, Kate is just being gaslit and, oppressed, and at the end she's a broken woman. Whereas Marilyn reads it as a fun, playful thing where this couple is actually really happy. And the way it works is that Kate at the beginning, she really is a shrew. She's like literally beating one of these guys over the head with a mandolin or something. She's ungovernable. And what it seems to be is that she's just never encountered a man that was worthy of submitting to. And then along comes Petruchio, and it's like game on. She's finally met someone worth, a worthy opponent in this sort of playful match of wits. And in the end, I think it's the last thing, they go off in a sort of off stage. It's understood they're going to bed. And, it's love. And that's the idea that love in the context of love, submission is not defeat. It's actually, you can conquer a man through submission, I think, is one of the ideas there. Beautiful.
It almost sounds biblical
Mm.
as well.
Well, yes, very much
Sounds
so.
like I've heard that before too. But that's great.
Ephesians, right? If I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
and where it talks about the wife submitting to the husband, but in verse 21 of Ephesians 5, it begins that section by saying, "Submit to one another." So it sounds like what you're describing there is a woman who submits to her husband, but also at the same time,
Yes.
Makes a willing, submissive partner out of him too,
It's
because
a
he
mutual submission,
and that's what it becomes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the undoing of the curse of Genesis 3, with this sort of striving against each other. Yeah, I think another thing that's interesting there is a man worth submitting to, and therefore also worth sort of having a partnership with, is a man who is manly.
Right.
And that's, I think, what maybe is missing from a lot of this. And we were talking about the growth of orthodoxy. Orthodoxy makes demands.
Yeah.
And men, I think, inherently need duty. They need something to accomplish, something to fulfill. They need to be heroes. They need to be, they need to be patriarchs. They need to be protecting of their wives, their daughters, that sort of thing. And that was all defined as toxic masculinity. And so you can't be those things anymore. And so, yeah, I think the guys are just walking around sort of confused. Guys today are just guys trying to figure out, what does it mean to be a man?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had your father served in the Second World War. My grandfather served in the Second World War. My dad was a Vietnam vet. we knew pretty well what a man was in talking to them, um, and they understood duty, they understood brotherhood in ways that we don't, and that sort of thing. So how do we recapture that for young men today?
Yeah, there was that line in Max Shaler that I quoted last night that we have an urge to sacrifice before we even know what or for whom.
Yeah, that was great.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, and maybe that's, true of both sexes. It's inflected differently, right? I mean, a woman sacrifices a lot, and well, childbirth is like when when my first wife gave birth to our children, like the first one was without any epidural or anything, and I came away in awe of the kind of womanly valor involved. It's like, oh my gosh. But what was I going to say? It's just that I think for men that call to greatness is inflected in a kind of more public way. Um, when you become a father, you become invested in the future and in the community. You want an intact, healthy community. You're imagining your kids into the future. So that makes it kind of, there's some draw to political engagement, I think, in becoming a parent and a father in particular. So, that question came up last night, what about just retreating to the desert, sort of Paul Kingsnorth style, which is, there's in that kind of asceticism, there is a form of kind of manly courage, but it's, that retreat from the world, I think is not, I mean, it's not an option if you're a father. It calls for a different kind of.
That's good for the monk, right?
Yeah.
But not for the
right.
the family, maybe.
Yeah.
Interesting. Let me switch gears just a little bit. Still thinking about young men, but in your book, Shop Class as Soulcraft, you talk about the importance of manual labor, among other things. So do you have any kind of general advice to young men that are in high school? Like, who should go to college and who should be going to learn a trade? And if they go to college, like, why are they going to college? Is it to get a good liberal arts education? Is it to learn another kind of trade that this college, which is now sort of a vocational tech school, is going to teach them? Is it a hoop to jump through? I'm saying this because one of my sons said college for him was a hoop to jump through so that he could get a job. It was almost like a trade school, but it was more expensive and longer, So, I mean, it's a big question. I know it depends on the individual we're talking about, but do you have any kind of anybody here words of wisdom about this?
Well, I mean, the first thing to just notice is that with this whole AI revolution, so many of those jobs that require a college credential are going away.
Yeah.
So college I mean, for a long time, college has served a kind of signaling function that you're the kind of material that we could hire to do. We don't care what you major
The
in.
hoop to jump through.
Yeah, yeah. And that function as a kind of gatekeeper to the middle class may be going away now. The thing about the trades is that that's work that it can't be done in China. It can't be outsourced, right? So it's not going away. It can be, if you have, mass immigration, it can be taken over in a different sense by, a new population. So I think people in the trades have a strong interest in getting the immigration thing under control. But if I was to give advice to a young person, I mean, genuine liberal education, if it's still happening in various pockets, is a beautiful thing, right? I mean, that's the life of the mind. Absent any sort of career pressures, it's a good in its own, for its own sake. but then the sort of practical pressures that you have to take seriously as a parent. And I guess I would say if you can swing it, if you can afford it, by all means, take 4 years to devote to the life of the mind. In the summers, learn a trade.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I fell back. So I worked as an electrician's helper starting when I was 14, and did that all through high school and college. I graduated with a degree in physics. Could not find a job. I moved down to LA to look for work in aerospace. And after about 6 months, I was out of savings, and I found myself going around the parking lot of a home improvement store, putting flyers on the windshields of cars to advertise my services as an electrician. The flyer said, "Unlicensed but careful." And I got immediate response. I had all the work I wanted. So,
Huh.
and then again, and then I got interested in philosophy and went and got a PhD in philosophy. And again, couldn't get a job with, an academic job.
Yeah.
I ended up landing a job at a think tank, and I hated it. And once again, I quit to go into business for myself, this time as a mechanic.
Mm-hmm. I love in the book how you say something like the mechanic and the electrician work use your brain a lot more than you did at the think tank. Like
There's more thinking
there's more
going
thinking
on.
happening
Yeah.
outside of the think tank. So
Yeah.
y'all keep going there. I have to answer the door.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
happens when you do a podcast at home.
That's right. Always problematic. Well, this is a drastic subject change, but you were talking about reductionism at the talk this afternoon, and I have a friend that used to tell me that there's a farmer, and his brother's a physicist, and his brother's wanting to raise chickens, and so he's asking his brother, the physicist, how big do I need to make this thing for these chickens? And the physicist thinks on it for a little while and says, "Well, given spherical chickens."
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty good one for scientific reductionism. Sorry.
Wait, what happened while I was answering the
You
door?
missed the spherical chickens.
Oh, okay.
It was good.
One thing I'd proffer on that is I think as an addendum to what um, Matt said is just that there, you read stories about centuries past, how even the tradesmen of those eras were enormously well read. And not talking about they were reading the great philosophies of their age or even prior ones, but read poetry, read periodicals. And I think that that's something to bear in mind for young men is regardless of whether you pursue a life of the mind or you pursue a trade, read and read a lot. And it doesn't have to be doesn't have to be lowbrow reading. It doesn't have to be highbrow reading, but orient yourself towards reading something that you can actually put to memory and commit to memory, and you can just have as a way to engage in a different discussion with people. Because I think today we get into this dichotomy where you have people in government that are saying we need more trade schools, we need to send more kids there. Okay, there's nothing inherently wrong with encouraging that, but I think you should pair that with something else, which is just having, encouraging people also to stay learned in their own way and not just devote themselves to sink only into this one, vertical.
Yeah.
I think that's critically important. And just like you said about if you're going to pursue a life of the mind, go during the summers to learn a trade. It's vice versa. That way you actually can mend some of these fences where we have these two groups talking past each other.
And I almost think that these days, the real kind of intellectual energy is not happening in universities, right? It's kind of happening off the grid, as it were. I mean, obviously, the internet is full of all kinds of crap, but it's also full of some really fresh thinking.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sort of autodidact energy.
Yeah.
But I guess as a caveat or sort of qualification, I would say it's really important to read stuff that was written a long time ago
Mhm.
because it will blow your mind. If you're like trapped in the present, there's all kinds of, exciting and enraging and stuff, but you go read something written even 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, it's like, okay, this is of a different mindset, a different world, and that's crucial to sort of, I think, liberal education, the root word in there, liberal, has something to do with liberation. And I think what it is liberation from the present and all of its prejudices. And the only way to do that is to read works from the past, I think.
One of my favorite essays by C.S. Lewis is his introduction to Athanasius on the incarnation of the Word, and he talks about reading old books in that, and he sets a rule for people, or I guess a recommendation for every new book they read an old book also.
And old books are hard. They're alien. They're challenging. So it's a different kind of reading. And, it's easy to give this kind of advice, but like everyone else, I find it now very difficult to read any book because, like everyone else, my mind is just dissolving and corrupted by the chatter of the online stuff. So I think it requires a real kind of ascetic effort to carve out the space for that kind of learning, and that's tough.
To that end, though, dovetails nicely with what we started out with, which is men are seeking hard things and demands from them, and I think this is one thing that you can certainly put in that camp is demand from yourself your time, and make a concrete effort to own your time and make your time useful. It's good to stay up to date on things, reading what's online, but ultimately most of those things will be passé within 5 minutes of you having read it. So it's good to grapple with things that have stood the test of time because they've been through that crucible already of millennia, if you will, or of just previous generations putting it to task and grappling with it.
And also, like in Time magazine of 70 years ago, if you read some of those articles, like the level of kind of public discourse was pretty impressive not that long ago. So it gives you kind of critical distance on the present too.
Don't think about Neil Postman contrasting the Lincoln Douglas debates with Reagan. It's like, okay, you've got 2 minutes. How will you solve North Korea? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then there's the debates now.
Right, yeah, even more
which are
fun.
far removed even from the Reagan days, let's say.
Closer to MMA than
Yeah. On the men grappling with things, and I really like that, Matteo, about how about a book? There's a hard thing for you to do. Did you cite Matt? Did you cite William James last night as being one of these sort of vitalists that you were talking about? A couple of years ago, well, no, it was last year, a funeral for a friend and former colleague of ours. His son got up and told this story at his funeral that his dad would jog every day, and he would say to his son that William James says, and I've not looked this up to see, but William James says, do one hard thing every day. Like do at least one hard thing every day. And so he'd be jogging around the neighborhood and he'd go by the house and he'd just put his hand up in the air and say, William James, while he's jogging around. And I feel like that, when I get on a treadmill to jog, it's like, all right, I'm doing one hard thing today. But maybe the hard thing is opening up a book and sitting down with some silence and reading. It's a good thing.
I think that might be in James has is a chapter, I guess, in his book, Principles of Psychology. The chapter is simply titled Habit. It's a wonderful read.
Okay.
And he's talking about, yeah, doing something unpleasant simply because it's unpleasant, and that this makes you stronger.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's such a simple idea, but I have to keep reminding myself.
Every time I'm at the gym, I
Yeah.
think about the
Yeah.
like the sauna is making me
Yeah.
Oh, another point
stronger.
he makes in that essay is that um, to think of some, oh, I should do that, whatever, I should do X, and then to not do it, every time that happens, it weakens you.
Huh.
It's like
Wait, say
yes.
that again. So if
So
you're
you sort of conceive the intention to do X,
uh-huh.
but then you don't actually do it.
Okay.
That like every time that happens, it's sort of weakening your will.
Hmm.
Yeah.
No, I really don't like him.
Yeah, no, but he's such a charming writer. I mean, for me, William James is the greatest American
Yeah.
thinker.
Yeah.
And so the reason I referred to him as part of the vitalist tradition is he has this epic essay. The title is A Moral Equivalent of War. So
Hmm.
he was himself an avowed pacifist, but he worried about an atrophy of those qualities that are called forth by war,
Yeah.
the sort of the manly quality.
Courage.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And he articulates beautifully. I don't know if he and Nietzsche were reading one another. It's possible, but Nietzsche has this idea of the last man who is sort of self-satisfied, creature of comfort, and sort of shuns all conflict, is just interested in sort of comfortable, self-preservation. This is the bourgeois, basically. And James articulates what's so contemptible about that.
Hmm.
And so, but he's a pacifist, so he recognizes he recognizes first all the attractions of war, right? There's a whole romantic tradition of um, sort of glorifying war, and it's not illegitimate. I mean, but modern warfare. He's writing in the, I think, 1880s, so already
Yeah.
before World War I.
Yeah.
But already modern warfare says this changes the game completely. There's nothing uplifting about this. So what are we going to do? Because we don't want this atrophy. And so the suggestion he comes up with at the end of the essay is a kind of national service. So he says, let's pack up our gilded youth and send them to the salt mines and to, cutting trails in the wilderness and like hard stuff like that. He says to knock the senselessness out of them or something like that. It's
Yeah.
very spirited language. James has good credentials as a good sort of modern mind, and
Yeah.
yet he really appreciates the again the harder qualities.
Good.
Yeah, I think with what you were saying there about the romanticism of war, I think it's very just as a corollary, I think it's very interesting that the literature that comes out of the First World War, while enormously depressing, I mean, does not glorify much, if anything. But the moments that they do, whether it's Wilfred Owen on the Western Front, whether it's any of the Italian poets writing while fighting in the mountains against the Austro-Hungarians, they all kind of hone in on two very particular moments, which is the beauty of the moment when you go over the top, right? That charge coming out of the trench. And the second is the awe of the bombardment, whether on the receiving or on the sending out. And I think it's very telling that to that end, the modern battlefield of that era fundamentally changed how we perceive this thing romantically, and that we have to now, and I think our society at writ large has become more oriented this way. Rather than taking in beauty holistically, it's become very narrowly viewed, and we take very specific moments because the nihilism that has grown out of that war and has become more embedded in our society has forced us to, all right, well, if we're going to engage with the beauty of it, it's only going to be very short snippets. It's only going to be in these very small pockets, which I think leads ultimately to where a lot of young men are, which is, well, where is kind of the upside in all of this? And young women too. Like, where is the upside here socially, right? There's good moments here and there, but is there really beauty in all things? Is there really good all around us? Obviously moving away from faith and moving away from other things that keep us rooted, I think plays a big part in reinforcing some of that nihilism. But I'm hopeful, and I think that at least from, based on this discussion and others I've had, it seems that there is at least a trend of people trying to reorient themselves, like, fumbling through it, and it's confused, but they're trying to find it again in this more disintegrated world.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's clearly a real hunger out there. I mean, for meaning. I mean, just to put it in the most generic terms, and for, as you were saying, Todd, for some demand to be placed upon us. We, we're, I think, by nature oriented toward some kind of transcendence, something that's beyond ourselves, and a society that isn't able to affirmatively sort of offer that and models for it leaves people bereft.
Yeah.
I wonder if, a good sort of educational model would be biographies. I'm thinking of Plutarch's Lives, but it doesn't have to just be ancient stuff. Thinking of, so Churchill has a life of Marlborough, which is one of his ancestors, which I haven't read, but I understand it's a masterpiece. But the concrete human exemplars of virtue, and the virtues as they manifest, as in particular times and circumstances, like what is demanded of somebody in a particular circumstance, because it's always inflected in that way, kind of prudentially by history. It's not like the virtues, I mean, they're timeless, but what they actually require looks different in different ages. And having a kind of comparative basis like that, I think, can help one to discern what's required of one in your own time.
Yeah, it gets back to the reading the old books too.
Yeah.
Getting us out of ourselves and our sort of navel gazing. I want to kind of shift gears one more time here to maybe a final question or thought about the book. Is sort of, I guess, springboards from the book, Why We Drive. And just thinking about all the things going on in at least the city I live in. It seems like the powers that be are trying to discourage people from driving. So I showed you earlier, how they take months to work on the 3-lane thoroughfare, 3 lanes each way, near my neighborhood. And we think there's some great improvement coming. And we endure weeks, maybe months of lane closures and the traffic that builds up from it. And then we turn one day on the road and it's open, and the improvement is that the 3 lanes have been narrowed and a bike lane has been added on the right side.
Which is used by how many people?
Used, I think, 1 or 2 per year, I would say, on average. You see driving in Austin.
You don't ride a bike in August in Austin.
No, not if you want to go somewhere. Yeah, that's right. So there's that. There are other things going on as well, where it's like there's a traffic improvement happening at this intersection, but what they did was eliminate lanes, not add them, and it just builds more traffic. Now, I'm not sure if you talk about that in the book or not. I can't remember. But that's been on my mind, and every time I see these construction projects going on, I don't in changing intersections into a diverging diamond configuration now. They don't actually improve traffic flow. If anything, it makes it worse.
But they do give traffic engineers something to do. Yeah.
That's what I thought was happening. Okay.
So yeah, there's a story, but I don't know what year this was. This is during the development of driverless cars. So a Google self-driving car, some kind of limited test deployment in the real world, I guess. So it came to a four-way stop sign intersection, and it did what it was programmed to do, which was apparently to come to a stop and then wait for the other cars to come to a stop as well before proceeding through. But of course, that's not what people do. So the car got completely paralyzed. It's blocking the intersection. Some technician had to come and reboot it or whatever. And so the engineer who was in charge of the project said that what he had learned from this episode is that human beings need to be less idiotic. Okay, so let's think about that. How does an intersection actually work? Well, people make eye contact sometimes. Maybe one waves the other through, and there's an ambiguous case of right of way, right? So people manage to kind of improvise and negotiate it on the fly.
And the cars kind of
and
work forward and stop because someone else is doing it, and then the wave comes.
You work it out, right? So, but that kind of, a lot of these tech guys are kind of autistic.
Right.
So that kind of social intelligence that's on display at an intersection was just invisible to this guy.
And you can't program that in easily, right?
Right.
It's not the rule. So you got the rules.
Exactly.
That's what they did.
So, yeah. So, and I think that what's happening at that intersection is, this is an everyday occurrence of something that Tocqueville noticed when he traveled around America, which is this kind of improvisational democratic spirit of cooperation. This conflict, we're going to work it out on the fly, and we don't need a kind of supervising entity to decide it all for us. And that's what driverless cars offer, is a kind of overarching entity that will Michael Oakeshott, the philosopher, has this great line of a glorious collisionless future, which, is the sort of utopian, there will be no more conflict because we'll have this entity.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, so it seems like to me, driverless cars are like a very expensive solution to a non-problem, because in fact human beings are pretty good at doing this. So there is a kind of anti-humanism that I think is kind of just under the surface of this kind of project to eliminate the human element from every activity.
And that social intelligence, as you say, on display at a four-way stop is what's being called idiotic by the designer. And these are the people who often are in charge, I think, also of designing these intersections and these roads, which when a lot of these designs happen, I've lived in this house, in this neighborhood for 10 years, and I've seen a lot of changes. And I comment to my wife, it's probably tired of hearing me, but I think she agrees, is this change actually makes things not only worse, but more dangerous. And I just wonder who's going to be held accountable when this new thing causes a wreck.
So in that we were just driving over here, I told you this anecdote, I'll repeat it, that there was an experiment in Holland where in this one town, they, I guess there had been some problem with accidents there. And as an experiment, they removed all signage, traffic sort of signage, like all traffic lights, all curbs, all painted lines, everything. And the result was that drivers, going through this town slowed down and paid attention because they were sort of, subliminally getting the signal, it's on you, right? This is not being administered by this whole system. And the accident rate went down. So, like, if we could trust one another to have a basic, not just competence, but concern for one another, something that might be possible. Now, when you implement all these controls, it has the effect of making us less competent and less willing to extend to one another a presumption of paying attention and competence. It's like a vicious circle, I think.
Yeah, and it's the same. It's sort of the same or similar to the ethical point that rules are for the immature. So what you're describing, the Dutch experiment, works for virtuous
For Dutch
people.
Calvinists.
That's right, virtuous people.
Whereas,
sort of like democracy works for a virtuous society. And
no, this gets
it's like,
so in the book, I discreetly in the footnotes list the traffic fatality rates by country. And they differ by like a factor of 80 from the highest to lowest.
Yeah.
So when you have a lot of immigration from cultures with a very different driving mentality,
Yes,
it doesn't mix very well. And the way for traffic to work well and safely and smoothly is if everyone's able to predict one another's motions. We're very good at that kind of mutual prediction, but it depends on shared norms, not rules, but norms or habits, tacit ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So kind of homogeneity helps.
And not having it overcrowded, I'm sure, would help.
Sure.
That's why new drivers are so dangerous, though, is they're still operating on the rules. They haven't gotten to the norms yet.
Yeah.
Matteo, was it you who didn't, who weren't, who did like the Waymo
I'm
driverless car, though?
Yeah, I'm a fan. I mean, I say that just from
Not to put you on the spot.
no, not at all.
It's a safe space here.
Yeah, I just think it's and as a matter of fact, I think I come at it precisely from I come to the opposite conclusion operating from a very similar position as Matt, which is I think I'm a fan of it precisely because we no longer have those shared norms. I think that's just a society-wide problem in a number of areas. It's not exclusive to driving, but driving is one where those norms, when they're shared, leads to just a higher operating ability for everybody involved. And when they're not, people lose lives in those situations. So the way I see it is this is the compromise solution, right? If we're not going to improve our capacity to implement and accept certain norms as a society, technology is going to step in and do that for us by taking the power away from us. And I think there's a very good argument pro and against. I
take your point. And of course, once we kind of hand off the necessity of that kind of mutual accommodation, it will have a further atrophy of our ability to do that. I think one has to look with some skepticism at the safety claims made on behalf of driverless. I'm not up to the minute, but I do detail in Why We Drive. Forensic statisticians are looking at Tesla's claims on behalf of this autopilot feature and completely demolished. It turned out that Tesla was claiming much lower accident rate when autopilot is engaged, and wrong.
Yeah, and I'm even willing to accept that. It's more just
in principle. I think you have a very strong point.
Yeah. And for that same reason, democracy may not. Maybe we may need someone to step in. And...
I was going to say, you're a Tory.
That's
free.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could go on about this, but I will just ask, you've mentioned the footnotes a couple of times. I think they're actually endnotes.
Endnotes.
Yeah, and so I
Excuse me.
don't, no, I'm just saying I don't read them because they're at the
Yeah,
end.
yeah.
And so I think I'm missing a lot of
Well,
the good stuff.
I didn't want you to read them.
I know.
I don't want anyone
They're
to
actually
read.
hidden.
They're esoteric.
But your notes are interesting. They should be on the page.
They're long digressions, but you can only fit so much on a page.
That's the best part.
I've always been a fan of the endnotes that are in of themselves small paragraphs, and it's like, well, this you could have put this in the book, it would have been
Well, it's like,
appropriate.
yeah, it's like, but there's like, this has to follow that,
Mhm.
and that has to follow that. So that's the main page. But this, which also fits right in here, is super
Which is
interesting.
why
I
I give
love
a
it.
footnote.
Put it right
Right
there.
there.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're all footnote fans.
I guess. I don't know. Well, we have, I think, picked your brain sufficiently today. I won't ask my final question, which was, what do you say to moms of motorcyclists?
Well, you didn't ask it,
Nope.
so I
So I
guess
won't. So I'll have to get that off air. Thank you, Matt Crawford and Matteo Moran and Matthew Todd Hall
All right.
for engaging in this conversation today. Thank you all for listening to Theological